He didn't knock. He didn't warn anyone. The man kicked the ER doors off their hinges at 2 in the morning, raised a gun above his head, and fired a single shot into the ceiling of St. Gabriel Medical Center. Plaster rained down on a waiting room full of sick children and terrified parents. He screamed at the top of his lungs that the next bullet was going into the first person who moved. A mother threw herself over her infant. A doctor dropped to his knees with his hands up. Every trained medical professional in that room, every person hired to stay calm under pressure, collapsed into panic in an instant. Every single one of them, except her. She didn't duck. She didn't scream. She just turned around and looked at him, and something in her eyes made him stop. If this story already has you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button right now and follow along with me until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Part 1. The shift had been quiet, which was the kind of thing veteran nurses never trusted and rookies never appreciated. Ava Collins appreciated it, not because she was naive, but because she had spent 8 years in places where quiet was a gift that arrived without warning and disappeared the same way, and she had learned a long time ago to take it when it came. She was standing at the nurse's station filling out chart notes when Sandra Birch, the charge nurse, dropped a stack of folders on the counter next to her and blew out a long breath. "You eat yet?" Sandra asked. "I had something earlier." "That's not an answer. Granola bar counts." Sandra gave her the look she reserved for interns who tried to argue about dosage calculations. "You've been here since 7? It's after 2 in the morning. Go to the break room. I'll cover the desk for 15 minutes. Ava opened her mouth to argue, and Sandra held up one hand without looking at her. "That's not a request, Collins. Go." Ava set down her pen, pushed back from the desk, and walked. She was halfway down the hall when the explosion happened. It wasn't a bomb, it just sounded like one. The ER entrance doors, heavy, reinforced the kind that swung open with a simple push, blew inward like they weighed nothing. The sound was a crack and a crash, and then a boom that echoed off every wall in the corridor, and before the sound even finished traveling, people were already screaming. Ava stopped walking. She didn't spin around. She didn't gasp. She turned slowly, the way someone turns when they already know what they're going to see, and she assessed the situation in the 3 seconds it took the first wave of a panic to reach her. 7 feet tall, maybe more, built like something that had been assembled rather than born with forearms like bridge cables and a neck so thick it looked structural. Tattoos crawled up both arms and disappeared beneath a torn black jacket. His face was drenched in sweat. His eyes were moving too fast, skipping from one thing to the next, unable to settle. His hands were shaking. The gun was a 9mm, semi-automatic, one round fired into the ceiling casing already on the floor. He was holding it with both hands now, but his grip was wrong, too tight on the left, too loose on the right. The stance of someone who had held one before, but not often enough to make it instinct. In the time it took most people in that hallway to process that a gunman had just entered the building, Ava Collins had cataloged 14 separate details about him and reached 3 conclusions. He was terrified. He was not in any professional sense dangerous, and he was about 30 seconds away from doing something he could never take back. The screaming intensified around her. A woman to her left grabbed her daughter and ran for the far wall. 2 nurses near the triage window had dove behind the counter. Dr. Paul Renner, a third-year resident who had once performed a field intubation without breaking a sweat, pressed himself flat against the wall with his hands raised above his head and his eyes squeezed shut. The gunman shouted something. His voice cracked in the middle of it, which told Ava something important. "Everybody stop moving. I said stop. Where is he? Where is doctor? Where is the doctor? Who somebody better answer me right now, or I swear to God." His voice broke again on the latter word. Not from rage, from grief. Ava started walking toward him. Behind her, Sandra Birch grabbed her arm and hissed her name. "Ava, Ava, what are you? Stop. Are you out of your mind?" Ava kept walking. "Collins, do not." She was already 10 feet away, then 8, then 5. The gunman saw her coming and swung the weapon toward her. Back up. Right now, I will." "I hear you," Ava said. Her voice was completely level, not performatively calm, not the practiced tone of a hostage negotiator on television, just even, steady. The voice of someone for whom the word danger had a very different shape than it did for most people. The gun was now pointed directly at her chest from 4 feet away. She stopped. She did not raise her hands. She kept them at her sides, open, visible, and she looked at him directly, not at the gun, not at his hands, but at his face, at his eyes specifically. "I hear you," she said again. "Something happened. Someone you care about is in this hospital, or they should be, and they're not. And right now you feel like no one is listening, and the only way to make them listen is to do something that can't be ignored." The gun trembled. I'm listening, and she said, right now, you have my full attention. Tell me what happened. The entire ER had gone almost completely silent. Somewhere in the back, a child was still crying softly, the sound muffled like someone had pulled them close and pressed their face into a shoulder. The fluorescent lights hummed. The gunman breathed in ragged pulls, his chest heaving, sweat dripping from his jaw. My brother, he said. The words came out broken. My brother came in 2 hours ago. Chest pain, they said. They said they were going to run tests, and then they left him. Nobody came back. I was in the waiting room for 2 hours and nobody told me anything. And then they said he coded. They said he was gone. They said his voice disintegrated completely. The gun dropped about an inch as his shoulder shook. They said he was gone and nobody even told me. I had to hear it from some kid at the front desk who couldn't even look me in the eye. 2 hours. I was sitting 20 feet away and nobody told me my brother was dying. The silence in the ER was the specific silence of a room full of people who had stopped breathing. Ava took one small step forward, not toward the gun, toward him. What's your brother's name? She asked. He blinked. Whatever he had been expecting her to say, it wasn't that. What? Your brother? What's his name? His chin dropped. His whole enormous body seemed to sag downward like the bones inside had gone soft. Daniel, he said. His name is Daniel. How old? 34. A breath. He was 34. And you're Marcus? He said his own name like it surprised him. I'm Marcus. Marcus. She said it back to him in exactly the same register he had used without pity and without distance. I'm so sorry about Daniel. What happened to him was not okay. The way you were treated tonight was not okay. That is the truth, and I am not going to stand here and pretend otherwise just to get you to lower that gun. Something shifted in his face. He had been braced for the opposite. For the calm, professional tone that said nothing real, that moved around grief like it was an obstacle. But, she continued, I need you to hear me right now, Marcus, because I am talking to you and not through you. There are people in this room who are sick. There are children behind you who are scared. And whatever happens in the next 5 minutes, Daniel is still gone. Lowering that weapon doesn't change what happened to your brother, but it does change what happens to you. And I think Daniel would care about that. The gun lowered another 3 inches. From the nurse's station, Sandra watched with her hand pressed over her mouth and her phone in her other hand, the security extension already dialed but not yet called. She had worked in emergency medicine for 19 years. She had seen panicked family members. She had seen violent patients. She had seen a man come in once with a knife embedded in his shoulder who was somehow still fighting with the paramedics. She had never seen another nurse walk toward a drawn weapon and hold a conversation. Marcus's arm dropped another inch. His breath was still ragged, but the quality of it had changed. The sharp animal edge of it was beginning to dull. Then the second door opened. It wasn't the ER entrance. It was the side corridor door, the one that connected to the administrative wing, and the man who came through it was Dr. Gerald Fitch, the hospital's chief of medicine, who had been called down from his office and who walked into the situation with the specific confidence of a man who believed his authority extended to all circumstances, including armed standoffs. Sir, he said loudly, his voice projecting the way it did in board meetings, I need you to put that weapon down immediately. This is a hospital. You are in violation of... Marcus spun. The gun came back up, full height this time. Everything that had been built in the previous 4 minutes collapsed in an instant. You! Marcus's voice lost all the grief and filled with something else entirely. Raw, uncontrolled fury. You're the one who let him die. You're the one who left him in there without anyone. Sir, I assure you, I had no knowledge of... Don't. The word came out like a bullet. Don't you stand there and tell me you had no knowledge. His name was Daniel Warren, and he came in at midnight and he sat in an intake room for 45 minutes before anyone... Dr. Fitch's expression flickered. A tell. The smallest possible tell the kind of person had to know how to read to catch. Ava caught it. Marcus caught it too. You knew, Marcus said. His voice dropped to something almost quiet, which was somehow more frightening than the screaming. You knew something went wrong and you're standing here anyway. I am trying to manage a very volatile... Don't talk to me about volatile. Marcus stepped forward. His hand had stopped shaking. That was the part that worried Ava. Shaking hands meant fear. Steady hands meant decision. She moved, not toward Marcus, toward Dr. Fitch. She stepped directly in front of him, putting her body between the physician and the gun, and turned back to face Marcus. Fitch made a sound of protest behind her, and she spoke over it without raising her voice. Marcus, look at me. Look at me. He did. His eyes found hers, and something in the lock of that contact held. I know what that look on his face means, she said, but you know what it means. We're going to deal with that. I promise you that whatever happened to Daniel tonight, it is not going to disappear into a filing cabinet. But you have to give me the gun, not because he deserves it, not because this hospital deserves it, because you deserve to walk out of here, and right now that is the only thing I care about. The standoff stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Behind Marcus, 2 security guards had appeared in the doorway. Ava caught the motion in her peripheral vision and gave the smallest possible sideways shake of her head. They stopped. Marcus's jaw worked silently. His eyes were red. His hand was still steady on the weapon, but something behind the steadiness was cracking. He was the only family I had left, he said. The words were barely audible. He was it. That's it. I know, Ava said. I know. The gun came down slowly, all the way down until his arm hung loose at his side and the weapon dangled from fingers that had gone limp. He didn't drop it, his grip never fully released, but his body curved inward, like a building collapsing in slow motion, and a sound came out of him that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with a man who had been holding something unbearable for 2 hours and had finally run out of strength. Sandra Birch, who had waited the longest 19 years of her career behind that desk, finally called security. 3 of them came through the doors, professional, efficient, trained. They moved toward Marcus, and he didn't resist. He let them take the weapon. He let them put him against the wall. He made no sound except for the ragged, broken sound of someone who had lost the last person who knew their name. Ava watched. Dr. Fitch straightened his jacket and cleared his throat and said something about protocol. She didn't hear most of it. She was already walking toward Marcus, who was being held against the wall by 2 guards, while the 3rd called for law enforcement. His brother died tonight, she said to the nearest guard. His name is Marcus. He's not a threat. He's in crisis. Ma'am, I need you to step back. He needs to sit down. He needs water. And when the officers arrive, I want to be the one who talks to them first. Can you give me that? The guard looked at her, then at Marcus, then back at her. Something in her face apparently settled the argument because he nodded once and stepped back 2 inches. Dr. Fitch appeared at her elbow. Miss Collins, I need to speak with you privately. In a minute. Now, please. Doctor. She turned and looked at him with the same direct, unhurried attention she had given Marcus. I said in a minute. There is a man in crisis in front of me, and he is my patient right now. Unless something in this building is on fire, you can wait. Fitch's mouth opened, closed. He stepped back. Sandra appeared beside Ava with a cup of water and a blanket which she had retrieved from somewhere with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had been doing this job long enough to know what was needed before anyone asked. She handed them to Ava without a word. Ava took them to Marcus. He was sitting now, his back against the wall, his head down. She crouched in front of him and held out the water. Marcus, he looked up. His face was a wreck. Drink this. He took the cup. His hands were shaking again, which was good. Shaking meant fear, and fear meant survival instinct, and survival instinct meant he was still in there somewhere. What's going to happen to me, Hatim, he asked. Officers are coming. They'll take a report. You'll be taken in for evaluation. Given what happened tonight, what really happened, the full picture, you have options. You have people who can speak for you, including me. You don't even know me. I know Daniel mattered. She held his gaze. That's enough to start. He looked at her for a long moment with something complicated in his expression. Not gratitude, exactly. Not trust, exactly. But the beginning of something that might become one or the other given enough time and enough honesty. Who are you, he asked. She didn't answer right away. From across the room, Dr. Renner, who had finally peeled himself off the wall, was staring at her with an expression she recognized. She had worn it herself once, a long time ago, watching someone do something in a combat situation that she had not believed possible until she saw it. That particular expression of recalibrated reality. Sandra was staring at her too. So were 3 nurses who had come out from behind the counter. So was every person in the ER who had watched a rookie nurse walk toward a loaded weapon without breaking stride and talk a 6'7" grieving giant back from the edge of something catastrophic without raising her voice once. Who are you? Marcus asked again. Ava stood up. She smoothed the front of her scrubs. She looked at the room, at all of it, all the faces, all the open mouths, all the questions that hadn't found their shape yet, and she felt the familiar weight of a secret that was going to have to become a little less secret before the night was over. Right now, she said, I'm your nurse. She left Marcus with the security team and walked back toward the station. The ER had begun the slow, jangled process of returning to something like function. Someone had restarted a monitoring alarm that had been silenced. A crying child had stopped crying. Two nurses were back at their posts, moving with the particular jittery efficiency of people redirecting adrenaline into action. Dr. Renner fell into step beside her. He was younger than her by 3 years and had always treated her with the mild condescension of someone who assumed his medical degree was a permanent credential of superiority in all situations. He wasn't condescending right now. He stopped. Tried again. How did you? He needed someone to listen. Ava, there was a gun pointed at your face. I know. And you walked right up to, he ran a hand through his hair. I've been in emergency medicine for 3 years. I froze. I completely froze. You walked toward him. She stopped walking and turned to look at him. Dr. Renner, you froze because you're human. That's not a failure, that's biology. Threat response is a physiological event, not a moral one. Don't make it mean something about who you are. He stared at her. How do you know that? She held his gaze for exactly 1 beat. Experience, she said and kept walking. Dr. Fitch was waiting for her at the nurse's station. He had his arms crossed and his administrative face, and which was the face he wore when he wanted to communicate authority through posture because the actual conversation was going to be uncomfortable. Miss Collins, he said, I want a debrief on what just occurred. Of course, she said, but first I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly. He blinked. Excuse me. Daniel Warren, the patient who presented tonight with chest pain, what happened? Fitch's jaw tightened. That is a matter for internal review. What happened to him? She repeated. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. A long silence. There was a delay in assessment, Fitch said finally, each word chosen with the care of a man already composing a legal defense. A staffing situation complicated the triage process. By the time the attending reached the patient, his condition had deteriorated significantly. He was left in an intake room. He was in a monitored queue for 45 minutes with chest pain and a history of cardiac issues, which I'm going to assume was in his intake form because it always is. Fitch said nothing. That man out there with the gun is not the problem, Ava said. He is the symptom. Whatever review process you have, I would recommend starting it before the officers arrive because the story of tonight is going to be told, and it's going to be told accurately, including the part where Daniel Warren's death may have been preventable. Fitch stared at her with the expression of a man who had not expected at 2:30 in the morning to be held to account by the rookie nurse he barely recognized when she passed him in the corridor. You are a very unusual employee, Miss Collins, he said. Yes, she agreed. I am. She turned away from him and walked to the end of the corridor and leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. She heard her own heartbeat. It was steady. It had been steady throughout the entire encounter. Every moment of it, the gun, the screaming, the moment when Marcus's hand had stopped shaking, and she had understood that steadiness to mean danger the moment when Fitch had walked through the door and undone minutes of careful de-escalation in 3 seconds. Her heart rate had not spiked once. Her hands had not trembled. Her voice had not wavered. She opened her eyes. Sandra was standing a few feet away, watching her with the patient, appraising attention of a woman who had spent 2 decades watching people under pressure and learning who they really were by what they did when things went wrong. You want to tell me what that was? Sandra said. A crisis situation. We handled it. We. Sandra's eyebrow went up. You mean the part where you walked toward a loaded weapon by yourself, while every single other person in this building, including physicians with advanced degrees, ran the other direction? Someone had to. Ava. Sandra's voice lost its professional edge and became something quieter. I've been in emergency nursing for 19 years. I have seen a lot. I have seen courage and I have seen stupidity, and I have seen people who confuse the two. What I saw you do tonight was neither one. That was something else. Ava looked at her. That was training, Sandra said. Specific, serious, not from a textbook training. The kind that doesn't come from nursing school. She paused. So I'm going to ask you once, and you don't have to answer me if you don't want to, and whatever you say, I'm still going to sign your overtime paperwork without complaint. But who are you really? The hallway hummed around them. Somewhere the police were arriving, somewhere Marcus Warren was sitting with a paper cup of water in the wreckage of the only family he had. Somewhere a man named Daniel Warren was in a drawer, and the answers to why were about to become very important to a very large number of people. Ava Collins looked at Sandra Birch, at the steady, intelligent, unfrightened face of the woman who had handed her a blanket and a cup of water without being asked, and had not once in the chaos of the past 20 minutes behaved as anything less than entirely herself and made a decision. I'll buy you a coffee, she said, when this shift ends. Sandra studied her, then nodded. Fair enough. They walked back toward the desk together side by side into the light and the noise and the long, unfinished business of the night. The officers arrived in pairs the way they always did in hospitals, one to manage the situation, one to manage the paperwork, and both of them moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had been to enough crisis calls to know that the most dangerous part was usually already over by the time they got there. The lead officer was a woman named Detective Rita Campos, mid-40s, with the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by human behavior sometime in her third year on the force. She came through the ER entrance with her badge already out and her eyes already moving, cataloging the room with a professional sweep that landed eventually on Ava. She walked directly to her. "You're the nurse who approached the subject?" she asked. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." Campos looked at her for a moment with an expression that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite suspicion, but existed in the specific territory between the two that good detectives occupied when they encountered something that didn't fit the expected pattern. "Walk me through it," she said. Ava walked her through it. She was concise, specific, and careful about the order in which she presented the facts. She did not editorialize. She did not perform. She gave Campos the timeline, the behavioral assessment, the de-escalation approach in the exact moment when Dr. Fitch's arrival had destabilized the situation, and she presented all of it in the same even register she had used throughout the entire incident. Campos listened without interrupting. When Ava finished, the detective clicked her pen twice and looked at her notes. Then she looked back up. "You said he was not dangerous in any professional sense," Campos said. "What does that mean in any professional sense?" It was a precise question. Ava recognized the precision and respected it. "It means his threat profile was grief-driven, not predatory. He didn't come in with a plan to hurt anyone. He came in because he was out of options and out of control, and the people in this building had failed his brother in a way that was going to haunt him for the rest of his life. The weapon was a way of being heard, not a way of causing harm." Campos's pen had stopped moving. "That's a very specific behavioral read for a nurse." "I've had training," Ava said, "in crisis response." "What kind of training?" A pause, not long, not evasive, just the pause of someone choosing which door to open. "The kind that taught me what it looks like when someone is about to do something permanent versus when they're about to break," she said. "Tonight was the second kind." Campos studied her for another moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook and moved on, which was the detective equivalent of filing something away for later. Dr. Fitch reappeared at the edge of the conversation with his arms still crossed and his expression arranged into what he clearly believed was the face of cooperative institutional authority. Campos turned to him and began asking questions about Daniel Warren, and Ava listened to his answers with a specific and focused attention. He used phrases like standard triage protocol and resource allocation challenges and staffing variables in a way that was technically truthful and substantially dishonest. And with each answer, the specific quality of Campos's listening sharpened by a degree. Sandra appeared at Ava's elbow. "His family is here," she said quietly. "Daniel Warren's family. His wife was called 20 minutes ago. She's in the family room." Ava looked at her. "Who told her?" "The resident on duty, Renner." "How is she?" Sandra's face gave the answer before she could. "I'll go," Ava said. She walked through the door that connected the ER to the family consultation room without announcing herself, without preparing a speech. The woman inside was sitting in one of the chairs with her coat still on her hands folded in her lap, and she was not crying. She was in the part of grief that comes before crying, the hollow, airless part where the information has arrived, but the self has not yet agreed to receive it. Her name was Christine Warren. She was maybe 32 with dark circles under her eyes that predated tonight and a wedding ring that caught the light when she moved her hands. She looked up when Ava came in, and something in her expression asked a question that her mouth didn't form. "I'm Ava Collins," Ava said. "I'm one of the nurses on duty tonight." Christine nodded, her lips pressed together. Ava sat down across from her, not beside her, not standing over her, across at the same level. "I'm very sorry about Daniel," she said. Christine's breath caught once sharp and small. "Was he alone?" she asked. When he, "I don't know," Ava said. "And I'm not going to tell you something that isn't true just because it would be easier to hear. What I can tell you is that we are going to find out exactly what happened tonight, and I am personally going to make sure that you get real answers and not institutional ones." Christine looked at her with the particular attention of someone in shock who has just heard something that cuts through the noise. "What does that mean?" "It means someone is going to sit down with you and give you a complete account of every decision that was made regarding your husband's care tonight. Not a summary, not a version. The account. And if there were failures, and I believe there were, they are going to be named as failures." The silence stretched. Why are you telling me this? Christine asked. You don't know me. No, Ava agreed. But I know what it's like to sit in a room and be handed a version of events that was assembled to protect someone who made a mistake. And I know what it can be long-term to have never gotten the truth. Christine's jaw tightened. Her eyes had gone wet, but she wasn't letting anything fall. She was the kind of person who cried privately and held steady in public, and the effort of holding steady right now was visible in every muscle of her face. His brother Marcus came tonight, she said. I know what he did. He called me from the car before I couldn't stop him. I kept trying to call him back and he wouldn't. She stopped, pressed her hands flat against her thighs. Is he okay? Is Marcus okay? He's with the police, Ava said. He's physically unharmed. He's in a lot of pain, but he's okay. Christine closed her eyes and nodded once slowly, like confirming something she had both dreaded and hoped for. He's always been like that, she said. Since they were kids, Marcus, just when he loves someone, he goes all the way. He doesn't have an off switch. Daniel used to say, her voice frayed, she stopped, breathed. Daniel used to say that Marcus was the kind of person who would burn down a building for you and then be completely bewildered that burning down a building had consequences. Despite everything, despite the hour and the weight of the night, Ava felt something move through her at that. The specific, bittersweet accuracy of it. The kind of sentence that took a whole person and held them up to the light. Marcus is going to need support, Ava said. Legal and otherwise. I can point you towards some resources. When you're ready. Christine opened her eyes. Why are you doing this? You're a nurse. This isn't... She paused. This isn't what nurses do, not like this. Ava met her gaze. What nurses do, she said carefully, is a bigger category than most people give it credit for. She left Christine with a social worker who had appeared with the unhurried competence of someone who understood that presence mattered more than words in rooms like that one. And she walked back into the ER corridor and nearly collided with Dr. Paul Renner, who had apparently been waiting for her just outside the door. He was holding a tablet, and his expression was the particular combination of unsettled and determined that meant he had found something and was not sure he should have looked for it. Can I talk to you? But he said, you already are. I mean privately, not here. He glanced down the hallway, not where Fitch can see. That got her attention in a way that was specific and immediate. She followed him to the supply corridor, the one between the medication room and the linen storage, which smelled like clean cotton and industrial antiseptic, and which had no cameras due to a maintenance issue that had reportedly been on the facility's work order for 8 months. I pulled Daniel Warren's chart, Renner said, his voice low. I know I'm not the attending on this. I know it's not technically my case. But after everything tonight, I needed to understand what actually happened. Ava waited. He presented at 11:58 with substernal chest pain, diaphoresis, shortness of breath. History of hypertension, smoker BMI 41. Classic MY presentation. Textbook. Renner's jaw was tight. He was triaged as a level 3. Ava went very still. He was triaged as a 3. Level 3, urgent but not emergent. The intake nurse flagged the cardiac risk factors, but the system kicked him to the standard queue because there were 2 trauma cases ahead of him and a full board. There's an override protocol for suspected cardiac events. Yes. Was it initiated? Renner looked at her. His silence was the answer. Who was the triage nurse? She asked. Someone named Baxter. He's been here 6 years. He's good. He's usually good. But tonight the board was a disaster and Fitch had sent 2 nurses home early because the early part of the shift had been slow and he was managing overtime costs and... Renner stopped himself. His hand went through his hair. Daniel Warren sat in intake room 4 for 51 minutes before anyone went back to reassess. When they did, he was in V-fib. They coded him for 22 minutes. The air between them was very heavy. 22 minutes, Ava said. They got him back briefly. 6 minutes of sinus rhythm. Then he went again and they couldn't bring him back. The thing about information like this, the thing Ava had learned in a career that predated nursing by a decade, was that it had weight. Not metaphorical weight, actual physical weight that settled into the body when you received it, that had to be absorbed before you could move again. She absorbed it. 4 seconds. Then she moved. This needs to go to risk management tonight, she said. Not tomorrow, tonight. And Christine Warren needs to have access to this chart independently through her own legal representation before the hospital has a chance to manage the narrative. If I do that, Renner said, and he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. I know, she said. I know what it costs. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm telling you what should happen and letting you make your own decision. He was quiet for a moment. Young, she thought. Not inexperienced exactly, but still in the stage of his career, where he believed that institutions, when genuinely confronted with their failures, would do the right thing. She remembered being that age more or less. She remembered what it had cost her to stop believing it. You know what I keep thinking about, he said. The way you walked up to him, to Marcus, the way you assessed the whole situation in about 3 seconds and then just moved toward the problem. He looked at her directly. I've been trying to work out if I've ever seen someone do that. Actually move toward a threat without hesitation. And I can only think of one category of person who moves like that. Ava said this. Ava said nothing. I looked up your file, he said. After. While everything was still happening and I was trying to process it. Your personnel file. And it's clean, completely clean. RN licensure nursing school in Virginia, 2 previous hospital positions. Nothing unusual. Nothing that explains tonight. He paused. There's a gap, though. 5 years between your undergraduate degree and nursing school. 5 years with nothing in your file. She held his gaze. People do different things in their 20s. Sure. He nodded slowly. They do. Another pause. I'm not going to push it. That's your business. But I want you to know that whatever those 5 years were, whatever it is you're not putting in your personnel file, what you did tonight kept people alive, including me, probably because I was in the direct line of the weapon when it first went off, and I was completely useless, and you were the reason he didn't panic further. He straightened. So, thank you, for whatever that's worth at 2:45 in the morning. The sincerity of it landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. She was accustomed to gratitude in clinical settings. Thank you for the medication. Thank you for the information. Thank you for the care. She was not accustomed to being thanked for the other thing. The thing that was supposed to stay buried under nursing credentials and hospital shifts in a quiet life in a mid-sized city where nobody knew her name before this one. It's worth something, she said. Don't pull files you're not authorized for again. The corner of his mouth moved. Fair enough. She left him in the corridor and walked back toward the main ER, which had by now settled into the post-incident state that medical staff called normalizing, and that looked from the outside like nothing much had happened. Patients were being seen. Charts were being updated. The ceiling tile that had caught the bullet had been propped over with a facility's notice volume. The specific collective amnesia of a system that needed to keep running, regardless of what had occurred, was already asserting itself. Detective Campos was finishing with Dr. Fitch. She caught Ava's eye across the room and gave a small nod that communicated 3 things simultaneously. I heard what you told me. I am not done with this situation, and you should stay available. Ava nodded back. Sandra materialized at her shoulder with a coffee that she had not been asked to make and that Ava had not known she needed. Drink that, Sandra said. Ava drank it. Renner looks like he saw something he wasn't expecting to see, Sandra said, not as a question. He's processing. Sandra sipped on her own coffee. So is everybody else. You know that, right? You know that every person in this ER is currently reassessing everything they thought they knew about the rookie nurse who's been here 4 months. That's fine. Is it? Ava looked at her. I'm not trying to pry, Sandra said. I told you that already. But Ava, what you did tonight is not something that gets ignored. People talk. Hospital people especially. By 6 a.m., this story is going to be in every break room in this building, and by noon, it's going to be in every hospital in the city, and the version that travels is never the accurate one. So whatever you decide to say or not say about who you are and where you come from, figure it out before someone figures it out for you. It was the most valuable piece of advice Ava had received in a very long time, and she recognized it immediately. You're right, she said. I usually am. It's exhausting. Sandra set her cup down. Also, Fitch wants a formal incident report from you by the end of the shift. I told him you were with a patient. Were you lying? Technically, you were just in the hallway, but I have a very flexible relationship with technical. She paused. Also, Marcus Warren is being transported for psychiatric evaluation. He asked for you before they put him in the vehicle. Ava set her coffee down. She walked outside through the ambulance bay doors into the particular cold of a hospital parking lot at 3 in the morning and found Marcus Warren sitting in the back of a transport vehicle with the door still open, 2 officers flanking him, and a paramedic doing a final check of his vitals. He was handcuffed but loosely, which meant someone had already made a judgment call about his level of actual threat, and it had landed where she hoped it would. He saw her coming and something in his face shifted. You didn't have to come out here, he said. I know. She stood in front of him. He was enormous, even sitting. His hands in the cuffs looked like they belonged to a different scale of person than anyone else present. His eyes were dry now, exhausted past the point of tears. They're going to charge me, he said. Probably, yes. Terroristic threats, weapons charges. He said the words flat like he was reading a receipt. Likely. You'll need a good attorney. There are mitigating circumstances, a lot of them. And what happened to Daniel tonight, the real story of what happened, is going to be part of the record. What does that mean? Does that mean anything? Does that actually change anything for me? She looked at him honestly, the way she had looked at him across the barrel of his weapon 2 hours ago. It means the truth is going to be told. What the legal system does with the truth is not something I can control, but the truth doesn't disappear because it's inconvenient for someone's overtime budget. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled slow and deep, like something that had been locked in his chest for hours, finally had permission to leave. My brother was a good man, Marcus said. I believe that, she said. And I'm going to make sure the people in that building know his name. One of the officers touched Marcus's shoulder, gentle but indicating. Time to go. Marcus nodded once. He let himself be settled into the vehicle. He looked out at her through the opening as the doors began to close. Thank you, he said, for not running. The doors closed. She stood in the cold and watched the vehicle pull out of the bay and turn onto the street and disappear. Then she stood there for another moment in the specific quiet that follows something enormous, something that has rearranged the furniture of an entire night, and she let herself feel the weight of it completely before turning around and walking back inside. She had 3 hours left on her shift. There was charting to finish, an incident report to write, and a conversation to have with Detective Campos that was going to require a version of honesty she had been carefully avoiding for 4 months. She also had a promise to keep to a woman named Christine Warren, which meant that before this night was over, she was going to have to walk back into Dr. Fitch's professional radius and have a conversation with him that neither of them was going to enjoy. She pushed through the ambulance bay doors. The ER received her back into its noise and its light and its relentless forward motion. Sandra looked up from the desk. You good getting there, Ava said. She picked up her pen. She opened the chart. She began to write. And at the other end of the hallway behind a closed office door, Dr. Gerald Fitch was on the phone with the hospital's legal department, and the conversation he was having was not one he would ever allow to be recorded. Because in 2 hours when the morning shift arrived and the administrative day began, he was going to need the version of events to be already assembled, already coherent, already shaped into something that protected the institution rather than the patient. He did not know yet that Ava Collins had already anticipated this move. He did not know yet what she was capable of. By the time he found out, it would be too late to change the story. The incident report form had 12 sections, and Ava had filled out 11 of them with the precise, economical language of someone who understood that written records were not just documentation but weapons, and that the words she chose tonight would matter in rooms she would never enter. She left Section 12 blank. Section 12 asked for a personal assessment of contributing factors. She was going to fill it out, but she was going to fill it out correctly, and correctly required information she did not yet have in writing. She saved the draft, closed the file, and walked down the hall to the medication room, where she knew from 4 months of shift patterns that the night pharmacy tech, a quiet man named Gerald, who wore the same cardigan every Tuesday and Thursday, would be restocking the cabinet at this hour and would not ask her questions she didn't want to answer. She was wrong about the questions. Heard what happened, Gerald said without looking up from the shelf. Heard you walked right up to the gun. Somebody had to. He placed a row of syringes with the careful attention of a man who treated small tasks with the same respect he gave large ones. My grandson's in the Navy, he said. 2nd year. I know that look is all. Ava turned to look at him. He finally looked back. His face was entirely without agenda. Not my business, he said and went back to the shelf. She stood there for a moment in the particular silence that follows an observation so accurate it doesn't require a response, then gathered what she came for and walked back out. The ER at 4 in the morning had its own specific rhythm. The acute cases from the night had either stabilized or escalated. The waiting room had thinned to a handful of people moving through the low, patient misery of non-emergency complaints. 2 nurses were doing charts. Renner was on the phone with a consulting physician, his voice low and clipped, covering a head laceration in Bay 3. Sandra was at the center desk doing 3 things simultaneously, which was her default state. Campos called from the precinct, Sandra said when Ava sat down. She wants you to come in tomorrow afternoon. Not a formal interview. She said to tell you it's a conversation. It's always a conversation until it isn't. That's what I said. Oh, I did. Sandra slid a printed form across the desk. Also, this came through from administration. Fitch wants all incident-related documentation submitted to legal before 6 a.m. Not risk management. Legal. Ava looked at the form, looked at the routing address, looked back up at Sandra. He's already moving. He moved the second the police car left the parking lot. Sandra's voice was even, but her eyes were not. I've seen him do it before. 2 years ago, we had a medication error that could have killed a 70-year-old woman. By the time risk management opened their files, the narrative was already written. What happened to the patient? She survived. No thanks to the process. Sandra paused. What happened to the nurse involved is a different story. The weight of that settled between them. Christine Warren, Ava said, has anyone told her she should have independent legal representation before she talks to anyone from this hospital? That's not technically our role. I know what our role technically is. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. The social worker on call is Diane Marsh. She's good. She knows the difference between supporting a family and managing them on the institution's behalf. If someone were to have a conversation with Diane in the next 40 minutes, Diane would know what to do with the information. Ava stood up. Where's Diane? Family consultation room 2, still with Christine Warren. She was already walking. The conversation with Diane Marsh took 6 minutes. Diane was exactly what Sandra had described, a woman who had built her career around the distinction between genuine support and institutional theater, and who received what Ava told her with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what was at stake and why the timing mattered. She asked 2 clarifying questions. She made one phone call quietly while Ava waited. Then she looked up and nodded once. I'll take it from here, Diane said. Walking back out into the corridor, Ava passed the closed door of Fitch's office and heard faintly his voice still on the phone. The cadence of it was the cadence of someone assembling an argument, not reporting facts. She noted it and kept walking. Renner was waiting at the end of the hall. He had his coat on, which meant his shift was technically over, but he was standing with the posture of someone who had decided not to leave yet. Fitch pulled me into his office 20 minutes ago, he said without preamble. Ava stopped. For what? He asked me what I accessed on the Warren chart. He didn't ask it directly. It was framed as a routine post-incident review, but that's what he was asking. He wanted to know what I saw and who I talked to about it. What did you tell him? I told him I reviewed the chart as part of standard continuity of care and that my findings were consistent with the official intake record. Renner's jaw was tight, which is technically true, and completely evasive. Good. Is it? He met her eyes. Because what I found on that chart is not consistent with standard care. And if I sit on it, you're not sitting on it, she said. You're giving the right people time to get into position before the wrong people lock the doors. She held his gaze. How long have you been in medicine? 3 years as a resident. Before that, 4 years undergrad, 4 years med school. And in all of that, did they teach you that institutions self-correct when confronted with failure? A long pause. They implied it. They implied it because it sounds better than the alternative. She kept her voice level, not harsh. The alternative is that institutions self-preserve. That's not a cynical statement. It's an organizational behavior observation. Self-preservation is not malicious. It's structural. And the way you work against a structural tendency is not by confronting it directly before you have leverage. It's by building leverage quietly, quickly, and before the other side realizes you're doing it. He stared at her. Where did you learn to think like that? That's the second time tonight you have asked me a version of that question. And you've deflected it twice. Correctly, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. The chart, he said. I printed a copy before Fitch's conversation. I have it. Now it was her turn to look at him with something recalibrated. You printed it. I anticipated the conversation. He reached into his coat and produced a folded set of papers. I'd like to give these to someone who isn't going to let them disappear. She took the papers. She did not say thank you because in that moment, gratitude was the wrong word for what passed between them. What passed was something more like recognition, the understanding of 2 people who had independently arrived at the same conclusion about what the night required. Go home, she said. Get some sleep. If anyone asks you anything else before you talk to an attorney of your own, say nothing. I don't have an attorney. You might want one by tomorrow afternoon. She folded the papers once more and put them in the inside pocket of her scrub top. Go. He went. She watched him disappear through the exit and then stood in the corridor for a moment, aware of the weight of the printed chart against her chest and the weight of the night against everything else. And she breathed through it the way she had been trained to breathe through pressure, not suppressing it, not performing past it, but acknowledging it and moving anyway. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then something made her answer. Collins. The voice on the other end was female-clipped, military-adjacent in its economy of words. This is Commander Rachel Stein. I'm calling from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service Field Office. I understand you had an eventful night. Every part of Ava went very still. How do you have this number? She asked. We have your number because we've had your number since you separated from service. Standard protocol for Tier 1 operators. You know that. She knew that. She had known that and had chosen over 3.5 years of civilian life to treat it as a theoretical rather than a practical reality. A number in a database that no one would ever call. What do you want, Commander? She asked. Right now, nothing. I'm calling because the incident at St. Gabriel tonight generated a flag. A person with your specific background appearing in an armed standoff situation generates automatic notification to NCIS. It's not an investigation. It's a welfare check, technically. I'm well. I can tell. A beat. I'm also calling because there are people at this office who are going to be very interested in your file when they come in tomorrow morning, and I wanted to give you the professional courtesy of knowing that before it happens. What kind of interest? The kind that comes with a conversation about whether the private sector is really the best use of your particular skill set. The hair on the back of Ava's neck rose with the specific physical warning that her body had learned over years in the field to take seriously. My service commitment ended, she said. I separated honorably. My private choices are my own. Absolutely, Stein said pleasantly. This is just a heads up. Professional to professional. Sleep well, Collins. The line went dead. She stood with the phone in her hand and the particular sensation of a perimeter being drawn around a situation she had believed was entirely within her control, and she recalibrated, quickly without the luxury of reaction. The call meant two things. First, that tonight's events had moved faster through certain channels than she had anticipated. Second, that the small, careful life she had been constructing in this hospital, in this city, was about to become significantly less private. She put the phone away. She walked back to the nurse's station. Sandra took one look at her face and said nothing for 3 full seconds, which for Sandra was the equivalent of an extended silence. You look like someone just called you from a number you hoped would never call, Sandra said. Something like that. Do I need to be concerned? Not on my behalf. Ava sat down. On Fitch's behalf, possibly. The desk phone rang. Sandra answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and set it down. Her expression had changed. Administration is calling an emergency board meeting, she said. 4:30 a.m. Pomnidea, Fitch, the CMO Legal and Risk Management. They're meeting about tonight. She paused. And they're meeting without inviting any of the nursing staff who were actually present. Of course they are. Dr. Marcus Hale is on his way in. Ava looked up. Dr. Marcus Hale was the head of the ER, not Fitch, who was chief of medicine and lived in the administrative stratosphere. But the actual working head of the emergency department, the physician who ran the floor, who knew every nurse by name and every protocol by heart, and who had been, according to hospital legend, one of the most decorated emergency physicians in the state before he chose St. Gabriel, specifically because it served one of the highest density, low-income populations in the city. He had not been on duty tonight. Someone had called him in. Who called him? Ava asked. Sandra's expression was answer enough. Sometimes the right people find out anyway, she said. Dr. Marcus Hale came through the ER entrance at 4:22 in the morning, wearing a jacket over a sweatshirt and the expression of a man who had been woken from sleep by information that had made sleep irrelevant. He was 61, compact with close-cropped gray hair, and the particular physical stillness of someone who had spent decades in emergency situations and had trained the urgency inward rather than outward. He walked directly to Sandra. Where's the nurse who managed the standoff? Right here, Ava said from 2 feet away. He turned, looked at her with the same kind of rapid, comprehensive assessment she was accustomed to giving other people. Collins, he said, 4 months. Yes. You walked up to a man with a loaded weapon. Yes. Talk me through it. He pulled a chair from behind the desk and sat, which told her immediately that he was not the kind of administrator who conducted conversations from a standing position of physical dominance. He wanted the actual information. She talked him through it, the full version, not the edited one, the behavioral read on Marcus, the de-escalation approach, Fitch's entrance, and the destabilization it caused the recovery, Marcus's surrender. Then the conversation with Christine Warren, then what Renner had found on the chart. Hale listened the way Campos had listened, without interrupting, with absolute focus, and with the specific quality of attention that distinguished people who were gathering information from people who were managing it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The chart, he said. You have a copy. Yes. How Renner. Hale closed his eyes briefly. Not in disapproval, in the particular expression of a man absorbing the full weight of a situation and what it was going to require of him. Fitch is in a board meeting right now, he said. I know. He's going to have the narrative built before I can get into that room. He's been building it since 3 a.m., Ava said. But the chart is the chart, and Christine Warren now has independent counsel being arranged. Whatever version of events gets assembled in that board meeting, it's going to have to survive contact with the documented record. Hale opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression she recognized from a very specific category of her previous life. The expression of a commanding officer reassessing an asset. How do you know how to do this, he asked. Not the standoff. This, the sequencing of it, getting the attorney involved, getting the chart secured, knowing which levers to move before the institution closes around the situation. The question hung in the air of the nurse's station, and everyone within earshot, Sandra, a tech named Fowler, a nurse named Priya, who had been pretending to file charts for the last 10 minutes, went very quiet. Ava held Dr. Hale's gaze. This was the third time tonight she had been asked a version of this question, and she was beginning to understand that the answer was not going to stay private much longer, regardless of what she chose to say. Sandra's advice from an hour ago came back to her with the force of something that had been correct all along. Figure it out before someone figures it out for you. I spent 8 years before nursing school doing work that required me to think operationally, she said, under pressure with incomplete information in situations where the wrong move had permanent consequences. What kind of work? She looked at him steadily, the kind the Navy doesn't advertise. The silence that followed was different from the silences that had preceded it. This one had texture. It had the specific quality of a room full of people recalibrating, not just what they knew about Ava Collins, but what it meant that they hadn't known it before. Hale absorbed it without visible reaction, which told her something important about him. Seal, he asked. He said it quietly, not for the room. I'm not able to confirm specifics. But not Seal. She said nothing. He nodded once slowly. All right. He stood. I'm going into that board meeting. I'm going to need someone to be available by phone for the next 2 hours in case I need the chart referenced. He paused. Will you be here? I have 90 minutes left on my shift. Then yes, you'll be here. He looked at her for one more moment with the full weight of everything the night had revealed. For what it's worth, Collins, what you did tonight saved lives, not just from the immediate situation. The patient safety piece that saves lives down the line. The kind that don't make headlines because they're preventions rather than events. He paused. That matters. He walked away toward the administrative corridor, his pace unhurried but deliberate, the walk of a man who had chosen his battle and was moving toward it with full intention. Sandra waited until he was out of earshot before she spoke. You want to know what the nurses are saying? She asked. Do I? They're saying you're the most interesting thing that's happened to this ER in 4 years. Sandra's voice was dry, but her eyes were warm. Priya has already texted 3 people on the day shift. Fowler told the paramedic team. By 7 a.m., you're going to have physicians stopping by this station on pretextual chart reviews just to get a look at you. That's not ideal. No, but it's happening. Sandra paused. How are you actually not professionally? Actually. Ava considered the question honestly. She ran a quick internal check the way she had been trained to do: physiological state, cognitive load, emotional position. She was tired. She was alert beneath the tired in the way that high-stakes situations left the nervous system alert for hours after the threat resolved. She was carrying the weight of Renner's chart and Stein's phone call and Christine Warren's face and Marcus Warren's voice saying he was the only family I had left, and all of it was present and real, and none of it had overwhelmed her. I'm intact, she said. Sandra nodded. Good enough. The rest of the hour passed in the way that hours passed after events too large to be fully processed in real time, in fragments and small tasks, in the physical discipline of keeping the routine going, because the routine was what held everything else together. Ava finished her charts. She called Campos and confirmed the afternoon meeting. She checked on 2 patients in the observation bay who had been in the room during the standoff and who both in their separate ways needed someone to sit with them for a moment and confirm that the night had ended and they were safe. She did both of those things without making them feel like a nursing task. At 5:58, with 2 minutes left in her shift, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number, different from Stein's, containing 4 words. We need to talk. Attached to the text was a photo. The photo was of a classified military document she recognized from 8 years ago, a mission brief from an operation in a country she was not officially ever in, involving actions that were not officially ever taken. Her name was on it. Her operational call sign was on it. Someone had that document. Someone wanted her to know they had it. And whoever it was, they were not calling from NSUMAS. Her hand was steady. Her heart rate was steady. But something in her chest that had been closed and quiet for 3.5 years opened like a door she had thought was welded shut, and behind it was not darkness. Behind it was the recognition that whoever she had been trying to become by taking this job, by choosing this city, by picking up a stethoscope and learning to heal, instead of to fight that version of herself, was not going to be given the quiet exit she had planned. She put the phone in her pocket. She finished signing out her charts. Sandra appeared with her coat. "Go home," she said. "Sleep. Come back tomorrow and we'll deal with whatever tomorrow is." Ava took the coat. Sandra: "Yeah, thank you for tonight." Sandra waved it off with the specific gesture of a woman who had decided that sentiment was fine in theory and excessive in practice. "Thank me by sleeping. You look like someone who hasn't stopped running in 8 years and just realized the finish line moved." Ava looked at her. Then she said, "You're not wrong about that." She walked out through the ambulance bay into the early gray of a morning that had not yet decided whether it was going to be clear or clouded, and she stood for a moment in the specific place where she had watched Marcus Warren's transport drive away, and she thought about what was waiting for her on the other side of that text message. She had spent 3.5 years building a life that asked nothing of her old self. And in the span of one shift in one hospital, in one encounter with a grieving man and a loaded weapon, she had reminded every person in the building, and possibly every person in several agencies, exactly what that old self was capable of. The question was no longer who knew. The question was what they were going to do with it. She sat in her car in the hospital parking lot for 11 minutes with the phone in her hand and the text message open on the screen, and she ran through every possible source of that document with the systematic precision of someone who had been trained to work backwards from an outcome to its origin. The document was classified. Not lightly classified, compartmentalized with a distribution list that numbered fewer than 30 people at its widest point. Of those 30 people, roughly half were still active duty, a quarter were in government positions, and the remainder were scattered across the private sector in the specific way that former operators scattered quietly, deliberately in jobs that didn't ask about the years that weren't on the resume. Someone on that list had that document and had chosen tonight to surface it. Tonight, not 3 years ago when she left. Not 18 months ago when she took the nursing position. Tonight, within hours of an armed standoff that had generated a flag in an NCIS database, someone had sent her 4 words and a photograph that essentially said, "We see you, we have leverage, and we want something." The question she kept returning to was not who. She had narrowed it to 4 possible names before the 11 minutes were up. The question was, why now, and what they believed she could give them that they didn't already have. She put the car in drive and did not go home. She drove 12 blocks north to a diner called Patsy's that opened at 5:30 and that she had been going to on night shift mornings for 4 months because it was quiet, it had good coffee, and the owner, a compact Greek-American woman named Dina, who was approximately 70 and entirely unimpressed by everyone, left her alone with her thoughts and brought refills without being asked. She sat in the booth furthest from the door. She ordered coffee. She put the phone face down on the table and she thought. By the time the coffee arrived, she had made 3 decisions. The first was that she was not going to respond to the text until she understood who sent it. The second was that she needed to talk to someone who understood the legal architecture of her separation agreement and what it protected and what it didn't. The third was that she was going to the meeting with Detective Campos this afternoon, and she was going to it with the full picture rather than the edited one, because Campos was the kind of detective who eventually assembled the full picture anyway, and meeting her there voluntarily was categorically better than being found there. Dana appeared with the coffee, looked at her face, and put a piece of toast on the table that she hadn't ordered. "You look like you need something in your stomach," Dana said, and walked away before Ava could respond. She ate the toast, she drank the coffee, she pulled up the contact in her phone that she had transferred from device to device for 3 years without ever calling, and that she had privately told herself she was keeping out of sentiment rather than necessity. The name on the contact was Briggs. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant either he was an early riser or he had already heard. "Collins," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, even slightly raspy with the particular quality of a man who had spent years speaking in low registers in spaces where sound traveled. "Briggs, I heard about the hospital. Already. Word moves fast when the right flags get tripped." A brief pause. "You okay?" "Yes, I got a text this morning, unknown number. There was an attachment." Silence. 2 seconds of it, which from Briggs was the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. "What kind of attachment?" She described it. The document, the classification level. The operation designation. She didn't say the operation name aloud even now, even in a quiet diner at 6 in the morning, because some habits were structural. Another silence longer this time. That document should not exist outside of a secured server, Briggs said. I know. The distribution list on that file was 28 people. I counted 30. But yes. Have you responded? No. Good. Don't. She heard him moving, the sound of something being set down, a door being closed. When he came back, his voice was closer to the phone. Collins, I have to ask you something and I need a straight answer. When have I ever given you anything else? The night in Bahrain, you told me the exfil route was clear when you hadn't fully. That was a tactical assessment under time pressure, and we made it out, Briggs. Barely. A beat, and she could hear him almost smiling despite everything. Okay, straight question. The hospital situation tonight, was it random? Were you there by chance or did someone place you there? The question landed with specific weight because it was the right question. The question that, if she were running an operation rather than living a life, she would have asked herself before anything else. I've been at that hospital for 4 months, she said. The timeline doesn't support placement. The standoff was random. The gunman was a grieving family member, not an asset. But the flag it generated wasn't random. No. And the text came fast, within hours of the incident. Yes. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Someone was watching your flag, he said. They had an alert set, which means they knew you were there before tonight and they were waiting for you to surface. The implication settled into her with the cold, clear accuracy of information she had already half assembled but hadn't wanted to name. They knew who I was and where I was before the standoff. That's my read. And the standoff gave them a public moment, something they could use as a pressure point. Leverage, Briggs said. They're not threatening to expose you. They're reminding you that they can. There's a difference. Exposure is a punishment. A reminder is an invitation. To what? That's what do we need to try to figure out. She heard him pulling something across a desk. I'm going to make some calls. Old network. I need to find out who's been running queries on your file in the last 6 months because that document doesn't walk out the door without someone actively pulling it. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone built this play. Briggs, she stopped him before he could move further. Before you make those calls, I have a separate situation at the hospital that needs to stay clean. A patient death that may have been negligent. I've been working to protect the documentation and get the family proper representation. I don't want whatever is coming from this other thing to contaminate that. A pause. You took on a cause in the same 12 hours someone surfaced your file. The cause was already there. I just became aware of it. Collins, his voice shifted. You have been a nurse for 4 months. You walked into a hostage situation, de-escalated it, solo secured patient safety, documentation, arranged independent legal counsel for a grieving widow, and identified a likely intelligence operation targeting your cover identity all in one night shift. He paused. You know what your problem is? I'm sure you're going to tell me. You never learned how to have a quiet life. You think you did, but you don't actually know how. She sat with that for a moment. Outside the diner window, the street was beginning to fill with the early movement of a city coming online, the first delivery trucks and joggers and people with coffee cups, the whole ordinary machinery of a morning that had no idea what the night had contained. Make your calls, she said. I have a meeting with a detective this afternoon. Tell me everything after. I will. She paused. And Briggs, thank you for picking up. You knew I would. She hung up. She finished the coffee. She left Dina a 20 for a $4 cup of coffee because some things were not about the transaction and walked out into the morning. She slept for 4 hours. When she woke, the first thing she did was check the unknown number. Nothing new. Good. They weren't in a hurry, which meant they believed their leverage was secure, which meant they hadn't anticipated her moving as quickly as she had. Small advantage, but an advantage. She showered, changed, and drove to the precinct at 1:45, 15 minutes early, because being early to a meeting was information. Detective Campos noticed. She was standing in the lobby when Ava arrived, and she clocked the timing with the small, precise nod of someone filing it appropriately. She led Ava back through the precinct to a room that was as promised. Not an interrogation room. It was an office with 2 chairs and a table and a window, and nobody watching through glass, and she closed the door and sat down with a legal pad and a coffee she'd clearly been working on for a while. Thank you for coming in, Campos said. Of course. I want to start by telling you the status of the Marcus Warren situation since you were the primary contact point. Campos flipped to a page in her notes. He's been evaluated at the psychiatric facility. The assessment supports crisis states secondary to acute grief, no underlying violent ideation, no prior criminal history. The DA's office is reviewing the charges. Given the circumstances surrounding his brother's death, there may be grounds for a significantly reduced disposition. That's the right call. It's not a call yet, it's a direction. Campos looked up. His attorney who arrived this morning told me that Marcus specifically asked whether you were going to be available to provide a statement about his behavior during the incident, specifically to characterize his threat level. I'll provide whatever statement is useful. Campos nodded and wrote something. Then she set the pen down and looked at Ava directly with the expression she had worn in the ER, the one that existed in the territory between admiration and suspicion. I want to ask you something outside the formal scope of this conversation, she said, and you can tell me it's none of my business. Ask. I've been in law enforcement for 22 years. I've worked active shooter situations, domestic hostage calls, public disturbances with armed subjects. I have training in crisis negotiation. What you did last night in that ER, the approach, the read, the sustained de-escalation under direct threat, that is not nursing school training. That is not even civilian crisis training. She paused. Who trained you? The question was clean and direct and deserved a clean, direct answer. And Ava had spent the 4 hours of sleep she'd managed deciding exactly how much of the clean, direct answer she was prepared to give. I had a previous career before nursing, she said. Federal service. I'm not able to discuss the specifics for legal reasons related to my separation agreement, but the skill set you observed last night is a product of that service. Campos absorbed this without visible reaction. When you say federal service, I mean the kind that doesn't appear on a resume. Another beat. Okay, Campos said and picked the pen back up. That was it, just okay, which told Ava something significant about Campos. She knew when to take what she was given and move. I want to shift to the Daniel Warren situation, Ava said, because that's the part of last night that doesn't resolve with Marcus Warren's psychiatric evaluation. Campos's expression didn't change, but her pen stilled. The patient death. The potentially negligent patient death. I have documentation. She put the folded chart copy on the table between them. This is a copy of Daniel Warren's intake and treatment record from last night. The critical elements are the triage classification, the response timeline, and the cardiac history flagged at intake that was not acted on within the standard protocol window. Campos looked at the papers but didn't touch them. How did you obtain these? They were provided to me by a physician who accessed them in the normal course of patient care review. The original record is in the hospital system. This is a copy. Have you provided these to anyone else? I've ensured that Christine Warren has access to independent legal counsel who is aware of the documentation. She paused. I have not provided the copy to anyone else. I'm providing it to you because if what happened to Daniel Warren was the result of a systemic failure compounded by administrative cost-cutting decisions, that is a law enforcement matter as well as a civil one. And because the hospital's legal team has been working since 3 a.m. to shape the narrative, and I would like the documented record to be in as many protected hands as possible before that narrative sets. Campos looked at her for a long moment. You're very good at this, she said. The sequencing, the positioning. I've operated in environments where the sequencing was the difference between an outcome and an incident. Federal service, Campos said, not as a question. Federal service, Ava confirmed. Campos finally picked up the papers. She read them in silence, her eyes moving with the focused efficiency of someone who knew what they were looking at. When she finished, she placed them on the table and looked up. 45 minutes, she said. Classic MI presentation. History on file. Yes. And the attending was where? Managing 2 trauma cases. The triage nurse made a classification call under resource pressure. The resource pressure was created by an administrative decision to reduce overnight staffing made by the chief of medicine earlier in the shift. She paused. I'm not saying the triage nurse is without responsibility. I'm saying the triage nurse was set up to fail by a system that was deliberately understaffed to manage overtime costs. Campos was writing now steadily several lines. This goes to the county medical examiner's office for determination of manner of death. If the ME finds that the delay was a contributing cause of death, it opens a criminal negligence investigation. She set the pen down, which is exactly why the hospital's legal team has been on the phone since 3 a.m. Yes. Campos looked at her steadily. Miss Collins, are you prepared for what this means for your position at the hospital? The question was not bureaucratic, it was human. The question of a woman who had been around long enough to understand that doing the right thing and keeping your job were not always compatible outcomes. I'm prepared for what it means, Ava said. Fitch is going to come after you. He's going to try. He has institutional resources, legal, administrative, HR. A nurse 4 months into the job with a file that has a 5-year gap in it is not a protected position. I know. She met Campos's gaze. But I have the chart, and Christine Warren has an attorney, and Dr. Hale is not aligned with Fitch, which means the hospital is not a unified front. And, she stopped. And Campos prompted, and I've operated in harder environments than a hospital administration with a lawyer on retainer. Campos studied her for one more long moment, and then she did something Ava had not expected. She smiled. Not broadly, it was the small, controlled smile of a woman who kept that expression in reserve for specific occasions. All right, she said, let me tell you what I can do from this side. The next 40 minutes were the most productive Ava had spent in a long time, which was saying something, given the 20 hours that had preceded them. Campos knew the county MME well enough to make a call that afternoon. She had a working relationship with the state medical board. She was also, she revealed without fanfare, a personal friend of the attorney that Diane Marsh had connected Christine Warren with that morning, which meant the information chain was shorter and cleaner than Ava had expected. When they finished, Campos walked her back to the lobby. At the door, she stopped. One more thing, she said. Yes, I ran your background this morning. Standard procedure for anyone central to an incident report. She paused. Your nursing record is clean. Your financials are unremarkable. Your address history for the last 3 years is consistent. There is no criminal record. Another pause. There is also a federal seal on a portion of your service history that I could not open with a standard law enforcement query. Ava said nothing. That level of seal, Campos said, is not applied routinely. It requires specific authorization and specific cause. She looked at Ava carefully. You should know that this morning I received a call from a federal agency asking me to forward anything related to your incident report through their office rather than the standard channel. Every muscle in Ava's body tightened in a way that was invisible from the outside. Which agency? They identified as NCIS. Campos held her gaze. But the callback number they provided was not an NCIS registered line. The lobby was suddenly very loud with the background noise of a working precinct, and in the middle of all of it, Ava stood with the precision of someone who had just received information that reorganized every other piece of information she had received in the past 12 hours. Not NCIS, someone pretending to be NCIS, which meant the call from Stein at 4 a.m. was either Stein operating outside her official capacity or someone using Stein's name who knew enough about the system to know Ava would recognize it. What did you tell them? Ava asked. Her voice was steady. I told them I would review the request through standard channels, Campos said, which was the professional equivalent of telling them nothing while appearing to cooperate. And then I ran the callback number through our federal liaison office. She reached into her jacket and produced a card handwritten on the back with a number and 3 letters. That's the direct line to our liaison. If you need to move something through an official federal channel quickly, that's how to do it in this city. Ava took the card. She looked at Campos. Why are you doing this? Campos was quiet for a beat. I told you, and I've been doing this 22 years, she said. In that time, I have seen a lot of people in dangerous situations. Some of them put themselves there, and some of them got pulled there, and some of them were just trying to do the right thing in the wrong environment and got caught in the crossfire. She paused. You walked up to a loaded weapon last night to protect a room full of strangers. You spent the rest of your shift protecting a dead man's family from an institution trying to cover its tracks. And you showed up here today on no sleep with documented evidence and a clear head. She looked at her evenly. That's not someone I'm going to make the road harder for. Ava nodded once. It was not a small thing. Thank you. Don't thank me. Go figure out who's running your number and why, and then call me if it becomes a law enforcement matter. She pushed the precinct door open. Because I suspect it might. Ava stepped out. The afternoon had the particular quality of a day that had moved too fast, full of information and motion and stakes, and she stood on the precinct steps and called Briggs. He picked up on the first ring this time. Talk to me, she said. I've got a name, he said. It took me 4 hours and 3 calls. I'm going to need a month to repay, but I have a name. The query on your file, the one that pulled the document, was run by a contractor. Private intelligence firm, former federal employees. They have a dozen DoD contracts and a longer list of clients they don't advertise. What's the firm? Arda Group. He said it carefully. You know it? She knew it. She had never worked with them directly, but she knew the name the way you knew the names of entities that existed in the same ecosystem you had operated in, with the specific wary recognition of a parallel structure that ran alongside the official one and didn't always point in the same direction. "Who runs it?" she asked. "Man named Victor Kale." Briggs paused in a way that meant the pause was information. "Collins, Victor Kale was on the distribution list for that document." She stood very still on the precinct steps. He was one of the 30. He was number 7 on the list. He had legitimate access 18 months before your separation. The access should have ended when his contracting cycle closed. Another pause. It didn't, which means he retained the document through an access window that should have been revoked. Which means he's been holding it for 3 years, Briggs said. Waiting. Waiting for what? "I don't know yet, but Collins, a man like Kale, doesn't hold a card for 3 years and play it the morning after a hospital incident unless the hospital incident gave him something. An angle, a reason why you're suddenly useful." She ran back through the night with the specific rapidity of a mind that had been trained to process information at speed. The standoff, the flag it generated, the NCIS adjacent call from Stein, the text, "We need to talk." And now Kale sitting on a document for 3 years choosing this morning. "He thinks I'm recruitable," she said. The standoff demonstrated operational capacity in a civilian setting. "He's not threatening me. He's advertising that he knows what I can do, and he wants to see if I can be redirected." Toward what? That's the question I need to ask him. Silence. Long enough that she could hear Briggs choosing his words. "Collins, I don't need to tell you what engaging with Kale looks like. Once you open that door, I know what it looks like. Do you? Because you've been a nurse for 4 months. You've been," he stopped himself, started again. "You've been someone who takes care of people. That matters. I know you think the old child doesn't touch you anymore, but I've been watching what you did last night from the outside, and I want to tell you, that is not a woman who left her old self behind. That is a woman who redirected it, and Kale can see that. That's the entire point." She stood on the steps and let that land completely. Briggs had always been able to say the accurate thing without making it feel like an attack, which was rarer than it should have been. "I'm not going to become something I'm not to satisfy Victor Kale's operational agenda," she said. "But I am going to find out what he wants, and I am going to make sure that whatever leverage he thinks he has, it is not leverage that can be used against Christine Warren or Marcus Warren or anyone else in that hospital who is depending on tonight having meant something. And if he won't accept that condition, then we have a different conversation." She looked at the card Campos had given her still in her hand. "But this time I have a detective in my corner, a copy of a chart that will be very interesting to a county medical examiner, and a 5-year history that no one is going to be able to use against me without exposing what they were doing with a classified document they had no right to retain." Briggs was quiet for a moment. "You built that leverage in 12 hours. I had good material to work with." Another pause, and she could feel him deciding something. "I'm going to come to the city," he said. "Tonight, don't respond to the text until I'm there." She started to argue and stopped herself. There were moments where accepting help was the tactically superior position, and this was one of them. "All right, Collins." His voice shifted to the register it went to when he was about to say something he meant completely. "What you did last night, walking up to that gun, protecting that family, all of it, that was not a mistake. That was you. You can't outsource that to your old life or your new life. That's just who you are." She looked out at the street. At the ordinary afternoon of a city that had no idea what was coiling beneath the surface of one of its hospitals in one of its residents, in a document that shouldn't exist, and a man named Victor Kale, who had been waiting 3 years for a moment exactly like the one she had accidentally given him. "Get here fast," she said. "Already at the airport," he said. "Told you, word moves fast." She ended the call. She stood on the precinct steps with Campos's card in one hand and her phone in the other, and the weight of the whole constructed night balanced across her shoulders, and she breathed through it the way she always breathed through the things that required her full self. And she made the decision she had been building toward since the moment the ER doors blew open. She was not going back into the dark. She was not going back into operations, into contractors, into the world where everything was leverage and everyone was an asset. She had left that world because she had seen what it cost in ways that weren't visible until years later. But she was not going to let it come for her life without answering it. Victor Kale had chosen the wrong morning to remind her what she was capable of, because she hadn't forgotten. She had just been using it differently. And the difference between her and every other operator he had ever tried to recruit was that she had spent 4 months learning something that no amount of training had taught her. She had learned that the most dangerous thing she could be was not a weapon. It was a witness, someone who saw everything clearly, documented it honestly, and refused to let the powerful version of events be the only one that survived. She walked down the steps toward her car. Behind her, the precinct went on doing what precincts did. Ahead of her, the city went on doing what cities did. And somewhere in a private intelligence firm with DoD contracts and a list of clients, it didn't advertise, a man named Victor Kale was sitting with his phone waiting for her to respond to 4 words. Briggs landed at 6:47 and called her from the arrivals terminal before he had cleared the gate. She told him where to meet her, and he didn't ask why she had chosen the hospital parking garage on level 3 instead of somewhere neutral, because Briggs understood that you met a threat closest to the thing you were protecting, and the thing Ava was protecting was still inside that building. He looked exactly the same. That was the first thing she thought when she saw him walking toward her in the concrete half-dark of the garage. 44 with the kind of lean, economical build that didn't change because it was maintained through habit rather than effort. And the same steady walk she had known for a decade, the walk of someone who was always slightly more aware of his surroundings than anyone standing near him. He stopped in front of her and looked at her face the way he always had, the full rad top to bottom, the assessment that took 2 seconds and missed nothing. "You slept," he said, 4 hours. "You look better than 4 hours should produce. Adrenaline has a long half-life." He almost smiled. He handed her a coffee he had picked up in the terminal, and she took it because it was Briggs and because caffeine was a reasonable response to everything the last 20 hours had contained. "Talk to me," he said. She talked. She gave him everything she had given Campos, plus the conversation with Campos afterward, plus the callback number that wasn't NCIS, plus what he had told her about Victor Kale in the document. She laid it out in sequence, clean and fast, the way she had been trained to brief, no editorializing, no emotional padding, just the facts in the order that illuminated the pattern. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands with the particular focus of someone who thought better with a small physical task to anchor him. "Kale reached out to me 6 months ago," he said. She went very still. "You're telling me this now?" "I'm telling you this now because I needed to see the whole picture before I understood what part he was playing." He met her eyes directly, which was the Briggs version of an apology. He reached out under the pretext of a contractor opportunity. Standard language, nothing that tripped any wires immediately. "I told him I wasn't interested and I didn't hear back. I didn't connect it to you because at that point, there was no reason to connect anything to you. You were a nurse in a mid-sized city and you were quiet, and that was what we both wanted." What was the opportunity he described? Asset recovery, Briggs said. Specifically recovering something that had been removed from a sensitive program by someone with inside access. He framed it as a leak investigation. Did he specify the program? No, but the description was specific enough that I knew the category. It was signals intelligence. Deep cover source network, the kind that takes 8 years to build and 1 leak to destroy. He paused. "Collins, the program he was describing, I'm not certain, but based on the operational parameters he outlined, I think it was one of yours." The parking garage was very quiet around them. Somewhere below them, a car engine started, and the sound traveled up through the concrete and dissipated. She stood with that information and let it fully arrive. A source network she had spent years building. 8 years in the field, 8 years of patient, careful, dangerous work, constructing something that would survive her departure and continue producing intelligence long after she was gone. If that network had been compromised, if there was a leak inside it, the damage was not measured in documents or data. It was measured in people, in names, in individuals in very dangerous places who had trusted the institutions she represented. Why would Kale be running a leak investigation on a Navy intelligence asset network? She asked. He wouldn't, Briggs said, not officially, which means either someone contracted him outside official channels or he's the leak himself and the investigation is cover. The second option hit her with a force that was physical. She took 1 breath and processed it completely before she said anything. If Kale is the leak, then surfacing your file isn't about recruiting you, Briggs said. It's about controlling you, making sure that the person who knows that network best, the person who built it, doesn't start asking questions that lead back to him. He's not holding that document as leverage to bring me in, she said slowly, working it aloud. He's holding it to keep me out, to remind me that he can make my life very complicated if I start looking in his direction. That's my current read. Then the text this morning wasn't an invitation, it was a warning. Yes, Briggs looked at her carefully, which changes the calculus considerably. She turned away from him and took 3 steps and stood with her hand against the concrete pillar and thought through what she knew and what it meant. The network she had built was still active. There were people inside it, foreign nationals, in positions of extraordinary risk, who were operating right now tonight based on the assumption that the infrastructure protecting them was intact. If Cale had compromised it and was using a private contractor cover to manage the exposure, those people were not safe. Had not been safe for however long his access had continued. She turned back. "I need to make a call," she said. "To who?" "Someone still inside who I trust completely." She paused. "There are two people on that distribution list who I would put my life on. One of them retired last year. The other is still active, stationed at the Pacific Command." "Collins." His voice had the weight of someone about to say something he knew she wasn't going to like. "If you make that call, if you start pulling on this thread from the outside, you are no longer the quiet nurse in the mid-sized city. You are back in the field. There is no version of that call that doesn't pull you back in." "I know." "Do you? Because 4 months ago." "Briggs." She cut him off, gently but completely. 4 months ago, I walked away because I thought I was done. I thought the work was done, and the life I had built around the work was done, and I needed to find out what I was without it. She met his eyes. "And what I found out is that I'm someone who walks toward the problem, regardless of what I'm wearing when the problem arrives. I'm someone who spent a night protecting a dead man's family from an institution that wanted to bury its mistakes. I'm someone who cannot watch people in danger and choose the comfortable direction." "That's not news to me," he said quietly. "Then you know that if there are people in that network who are exposed, I cannot sit on that information. Not because I'm operational, because I'm a witness. And I told a detective today that the most dangerous thing I can be is a witness who sees clearly and refuses to let the powerful version of events be the only one that survives." She picked up her phone. "I'm making the call." He didn't argue. He stood with his coffee and his steady presence and let her make it. The call went to Commander Alicia Park at the Pacific Command, who answered on the third ring with the clipped attention of someone who spent every working hour at a level of alertness that most people visited only in emergencies. Ava identified herself by call sign rather than name. There was a silence of exactly 1 second on the other end. "I thought you were gone," Park said. "I thought so too. I need 4 minutes and I need you to listen without asking how I know what I'm about to tell you." Another beat. "Go." Ava gave her Cale's name, the document, the retained access, and the 6-month-old approach to Briggs framed as a leak investigation. She gave it in 90 seconds, not 4 minutes, because the critical information compressed that tightly when you stripped everything that wasn't essential. Park was quiet for 8 seconds. 8 full seconds, which from someone at her level of training was the equivalent of a sharp, visible reaction. "When did you receive this morning in the form of an implicit threat? And your source for the retained access?" "Former colleague, reliable." "I need a name." "Briggs," Ava said, and watched Briggs look at her with the expression of a man who had known his name was going to come up and had accepted it before the conversation started. Another silence. "I'm going to need time to verify and to move carefully," Park said. "If Cale has active access, any query I run through standard channels will flag." "I know. I'm not asking you to run it through standard channels." "What are you asking?" "I'm asking you to use your judgment about who in your current position can be trusted with this information and to do it in the next few hours rather than the next few days." She paused. "Because if that network is compromised, every day is a day that people who trusted the institution are operating without knowing the floor has been cut out from under them." Park's breath was steady, but the quality of the silence around it was not. "You understand what this means if Cale finds out you made this call?" "Yes. He will escalate the threat." "Let him." She said it without heat and without bravado, just fact. "He has a document that places me in an operation that is already sealed by federal classification. Using it publicly costs him as much as it costs me. The only power it has is as a private threat, and private threats only work on people who are operating alone." She glanced at Briggs. "I'm not operating alone." "All right," Park said. "I'll move. Keep your phone on." The line went dead. Briggs looked at her. "You realize we just started something?" "We finished something," she said. "There's a difference." They took the elevator down to the hospital lobby because the next part of the night was happening inside the building and not in a parking garage, and because Ava had received a text from Sandra 20 minutes ago that she hadn't answered yet. She answered it now, walking through the lobby toward the elevator that went up to the administrative floor. Sandra's on the text said board meeting ended an hour ago. Fitch is calling it an internal quality review. Hale walked out. "He's in his office and he wants to talk to you." She typed back, "On my way up." 2 minutes. Dr. Marcus Hale's office was not the kind of office that accumulated the decorative signals of institutional achievement. No plaques on the walls, no frame citations, no photographs with politicians or hospital donors. What it had was a desk covered in active files, a whiteboard with a patient flow diagram that looked 3 weeks old, and the particular organized chaos of a man who spent 90% of his time on the floor and used his office primarily as a place to set things down temporarily. He was standing when she walked in, which she had come to understand was his default state. He acknowledged Briggs with a single sharp look and then looked at her. "Who is this someone I trust?" she said. "He stays." Hale assessed this for one beat and accepted it with the practicality of a man who did not have time for the longer argument. "The board meeting," he said. Fitch presented a framing of last night's events that characterized Daniel Warren's death as a standard adverse outcome within documented risk parameters. He had the language already polished. Legal had clearly worked through the night. What was the board's response? Mixed. There are 3 board members who are primarily concerned with liability exposure and 2 who are primarily concerned with what actually happened. The 2 who care about what happened are not currently in the majority. He paused. However, the county medical examiner's office called the hospital at 2 o'clock this afternoon. They've opened a review of Daniel Warren's death based on information they received through an independent channel. Ava said nothing. Hale looked at her with the expression she was becoming familiar with, the one that said he was 3 steps ahead of where she expected him to be. "The ME's office received a copy of the intake chart," he said. "Not from me, Marty, not from risk management, from an independent source." He paused. Christine Warren's attorney filed a formal request for independent chart review at 11 this morning. "Good," Ava said. "Fitch knows," Hale said. "He knows the chart is in play, and he knows someone moved it out of the building before his legal team could establish document control. He made a statement to the board this afternoon that implied a staff member had violated patient privacy regulations by releasing chart information without authorization." The room was very quiet. "He's going to come after you," Hale said. "He has an HR process that he can initiate as early as tomorrow morning. Unauthorized disclosure of patient information is a terminable offense under the hospital's employment agreement and potentially a HIPAA violation under federal law." She heard it land. She let it sit exactly long enough to feel the full weight of what it meant, and then she set it aside the way she set aside all the information that was designed to destabilize rather than inform. "The chart was provided to a treating physician in the course of patient care review," she said. "That is the documented chain. The physician reviewed it and determined that the information had patient safety implications that required escalation. The chart was not released to the public. It was provided through a legal process to an attorney representing the patient's family. That is not a HIPAA violation. That is the system functioning as intended. Fitch's legal team will argue otherwise." Fitch's legal team can argue whatever they want. They're going to argue it in front of the county ME and potentially a criminal negligence inquiry. And in that context, the question of who shared the chart becomes significantly less interesting than the question of what the chart contains. Hale was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "I put in a call to the state medical board this afternoon. I reported concerns about administrative interference in patient care standards at this facility." He let that settle. "I've been at this hospital for 11 years. I've watched Fitch make 17 decisions over that time that prioritize operational budget over patient outcomes. Daniel Warren is the one that has a name and a face and a timeline that is going to be impossible to explain away." He looked at her directly. "I should have done this 2 years ago." "You're doing it now," she said, "because you made it impossible not to." He said it without resentment and without flattery, just the plain acknowledgement of one professional to another about what the night had changed. "What do you need from me?" She thought for a moment. "A formal statement to the board on the record characterizing the administrative decisions that contributed to last night's staffing situation. Your name, your years of service, your direct observation. That statement in combination with the chart in the ME review and the family's independent legal action creates a record that is very difficult to manage away. I'll write it tonight." "Thank you," she paused. "And I need you to know that whatever happens with Fitch's HR process, I am not going to make it easy for him. He is going to have to go through every step of that process in full, and at every step there is going to be a documented counter record that raises questions he is not going to enjoy answering." Hale nodded once. Then his eyes moved to Briggs with a question he was too practiced to ask out loud. "He's going to help me manage something on the other side of tonight," Ava said. "It's unrelated to the hospital, but it's not unrelated to why tonight happened the way it did." Hale accepted this with the same practical directness he accepted everything. "All right," he said. "Go do what you need to do. My statement will be on the board secretary's desk by 9 p.m. They were back in the corridor when her phone rang. Park, she answered immediately. Tell me. I ran it through a channel that Kale cannot access, Park said. Her voice was level, but the information under it was not. The retained document access was confirmed. Kale's contracting cycle closed 16 months ago. His system credentials should have been revoked at that point. They were not. Someone inside extended them. Who authorized the extension? That's what I'm working on. But Collins, there's more. A pause that had weight. The network you built. We ran a quiet integrity check this afternoon through a back channel. 3 of the source contacts have gone silent in the last 4 months. 3 separate contacts, 3 separate locations, no overlap in their operational areas. 3 people, gone silent. Which in the language of intelligence networks didn't mean they had stopped communicating. It meant they had stopped existing in a way that could communicate. She stood very still in the hospital corridor, with the phone pressed to her ear, and the full meaning of that landing in her body with the specific terrible gravity of something that could not be taken back. 3 people who had trusted the network she built. 3 people in dangerous places who had believed that the infrastructure around them was solid. 4 months of quiet life. 4 months of charts and patience and night shifts and granola bars and coffee with Sandra. And the whole time quietly in the background, the thing she had built was being dismantled. I need Kale's current location, she said. Collins. I'm not going to do anything to him, she said. I'm going to give his location to a federal contact and let the authorized channels do what authorized channels do when someone has been using a private contractor operation to compromise a classified asset network. She paused. I'm a witness, Park, not an operator. I need the location so the right people can get there first. A beat. He's been in the city for 48 hours, Park said. I found a hotel registration under a shell identity his firm uses. I'm sending it to this number. The text came through 30 seconds later. She forwarded it to Campos's direct line with a message that took her 40 seconds to compose and that contained exactly the information Campos needed to make the right call, including Briggs's name as a corroborating source and Park's contact information for federal coordination. Campos responded in 4 minutes. 3 words, I've got it. She put the phone in her pocket. Briggs was watching her with the patient attention he had worn throughout the last 2 hours. It's moving, she said. I know. The 3 contacts, she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. That's on me. It's on Kale. I built that network. Those were my people. I have to live with that. Yes, he said. You do, and the way you live with it is by making sure it doesn't happen to a 4th one, which you just did. He held her gaze. You didn't walk back into the darkness, Collins. You picked up a phone and used every legitimate mechanism available to you to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. That's not the old life. That's you. She didn't answer that right away. She stood in the corridor of the hospital where she had spent 4 months learning a different way to be useful, and she let the truth of the night settle around her in its full shape, the good of it and the grief of it, and the weight of the choices that couldn't be unmade. Her phone buzzed again. Sandra. She almost let it go to the next moment, and then she read it. Ava, you need to come to the ER now. It's about Marcus Warren. She moved. Sandra met her at the nurse's station with the expression of someone who was managing multiple things simultaneously and was choosing which to surface first. His psychiatric evaluation results came through this afternoon, Sandra said. The state has the option to hold him for 72 hours. His attorney pushed back. There's a hearing at the detention facility at 8 tonight. And Detective Campos called to say she's submitting a statement characterizing his behavior during the incident as non-predatory and grief-driven. The DA's office is considering diversion rather than criminal prosecution. Sandra paused. But the hearing needs a medical witness, someone from the incident who can speak to his state of mind as it presented clinically. You want me to go? I want you to do whatever you decide to do, Sandra said. But yes, I think you should go. Briggs was behind her. She turned. He was already checking his watch. I'll drive, he said. The detention facility hearing room was small, functional, and attended by Marcus Warren's attorney, a public defender who was young but sharp, the DA's representative, a court-appointed psychologist, and Detective Campos, who was sitting in the back row with her arms crossed and her presence doing considerable work simply by being present. Marcus was brought in civilian clothes rather than a facility uniform, which was the attorney's first visible win of the evening. He was still enormous. He was still hollowed out by grief in a way that made his size look somehow more sad than threatening. When he saw Ava, he stopped walking for 1 step and then composed himself and sat down. She testified for 11 minutes. She described what she had observed: the behavioral presentation, the grief-driven origin of the threat, the rapid de-escalation once genuine attention was provided, the absence of predatory intent throughout the entire incident. She spoke in clinical terms where clinical terms were appropriate, and in human terms where human terms were more accurate, and she did not editorialize and she did not perform, and she was completely honest. The DA's representative asked her 2 questions. She answered both of them directly. The psychologist asked one follow-up. She answered that too. The hearing officer, a compact, deliberate woman who had been listening with the kind of focused attention that suggested she had made up her mind before anyone spoke, and was now either confirming or revising, looked at her steadily when she finished. You were the individual who approached the subject during the incident? Yes. Voluntarily, without being asked? Yes. And based on your training and your direct observation, you are characterizing this individual as someone who posed an acute grief crisis rather than an ongoing public safety risk? That is my professional assessment and my personal observation, yes. The hearing officer made a note. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the paperwork in front of her. She said 3 sentences that resulted in a conditional release pending mental health follow-up and a formal diversion meeting with the DA's office within 30 days. Marcus Warren was not going back to a cell tonight. His attorney shook his hand. Campos looked at her notes with the expression of a woman who had planned for this outcome, and Marcus himself sat for a long moment without moving. And then he looked across the room at Ava with the full exhausted weight of everything the last 20 hours had cost him. You came, he said. You asked me not to run, she said. I figured the same applied to showing up. He looked at her with something that had no clean name, not gratitude, exactly, not relief, exactly, but the complicated intersection of both, with the knowledge that his brother was still gone and that this outcome didn't change that, and that the person in front of him had chosen repeatedly without obligation to show up for someone she had met over the barrel of a gun. Daniel would have liked you, he said. He liked people who did things. Tell me about him sometime, she said. When you're ready. He nodded, once slow, and then his attorney touched his arm and they moved toward the door and the long process of a life that would have to be rebuilt around an absence that wasn't going away. Campos was waiting in the hallway outside. She looked at Ava, then at Briggs, then back at Ava. Cale is in federal custody as of 40 minutes ago, she said. My federal liaison moved fast once the dossier landed. What's the charge? To start unauthorized retention of classified government documents. The rest is going to take time. She paused. The document he was holding is going to be the least interesting thing about Victor Cale by the time the full picture comes out. The network inquiry, Ava said. Among other things. Campos left the details there and didn't embellish, which was the right call. Your file is going to get some attention from official channels over the next few weeks. People who are authorized to look at it are going to look at it. I know. Are you prepared for that? Ava thought about the question honestly. Prepared was a complicated word. She was not prepared in the sense of having a clean answer for everything that was going to be soon. She was not prepared in the sense of having decided what the next version of her life looked like. But she was prepared in the sense that mattered most. She knew who she was, she knew what she had done and why, and she was not going to apologize for any of it. Yes, she said. Campos nodded. Go home, Collins. Sleep more than 4 hours this time. She turned to leave and then stopped. One more thing. Fitch submitted the HR complaint against you this afternoon. It was received by the hospital's employment board. She paused. Dr. Hale submitted his statement to the board at 8:45. In it, he formally requested an independent review of all administrative staffing decisions made by Gerald Fitch in the preceding 18 months. Another pause. The employment board has temporarily suspended Fitch's administrative authority pending the outcome of the medical examiner's review. The hallway held that information for a moment. The complaint against me, Ava asked, is now sitting in the inbox of a board that has significantly more pressing things to focus on, Campos said, and walked away. Briggs was quiet all the way back to the car. He drove because she was too tired to argue about it, and the city moved past the windows, in the particular way it moved at night, all light and motion, in the suggestion of millions of lives running parallel to each other without touching. She called Sandra from the passenger seat. I'll be back for my shift tomorrow, she said. I know you will, Sandra said. I put you on the day shift, figured you'd earn daylight. A pause. Priya wants to buy you coffee. Fowler has already told the paramedic team everything. Renner left a note on the desk saying he's submitted a formal patient safety report to the state health department, and if he gets fired for it, he would like a reference. Tell him he won't get fired. He won't, Sandra agreed. Get some sleep. She ended the call. Briggs drove. The city passed. She thought about Daniel Warren, who had sat in intake room 4 for 51 minutes, with his life running out and no one coming. She thought about Marcus Warren, who had loved his brother all the way to the edge of something catastrophic and had been pulled back by a stranger in scrubs who had not run. She thought about 3 people in dangerous places whose silence she was going to carry, and she thought about the network she had built and what it would take to make it safe again. She thought about a rookie nurse who had walked toward a loaded weapon at 2 in the morning and held a line that no one else would hold, not because she was looking for a way back into her old life, but because the line was there and someone had to hold it, and she was the only person in the room who knew how. Briggs pulled to a stop in front of her building. She didn't move immediately. "You're going back to the network inquiry," she said. "You're going to help Park clean this up." "Someone has to," he said. "And you're a nurse." She looked at him. The simplicity of it, the weight of it, all that it contained and all that it asked of her and all that it let her keep. "Yes," she said, "I am." She got out of the car. She went upstairs. She set her phone on the nightstand, and she looked at the ceiling in the specific way she looked at things when she was allowing herself to feel the full measure of what a day had cost and what it had built, and then she closed her eyes. Ava Collins had not left who she was behind. She had simply learned to carry it differently, not as a weapon, not as a secret, but as the truest thing about her, available to every person in every room who needed someone to hold the line when everyone else had already decided to run. And that, in the end, was the most dangerous and most necessary thing she had ever been.